picture of what the Wajigwetu partners are doing. So remember, we talked about relevance. So the relevance in terms of the interventions that are used, in arts domain. So for instance, we found that there is quite a bit of use of participatory theatre. For example, with regard to countering violent extremism. And that does not mean that other things are not treated. That's just an example of how participatory theatre is being used. Of course, when one is talking about participatory theatre, one is talking about how communities and target groups participate in the creation of theatre and the discussion of those issues that come out. So Maye provides an interesting example of how participatory theatre could be used for countering violent extremism. Song and dance against harmful cultural practices and accessing justice. And this is not just with regard to the rights of widows, but actually with regard to other rights, and we shall be showing why it is necessary for song and dance to be able to become a useful tool to deal with culture, because songs and dances are part of culture. So it's almost like taking a cultural tool to deal with a cultural issue, in a soft way. Performing arts generally for civic engagement and building confidence of target groups and audiences. And Kisumu Progressive does provide an example of how you can build confidence for leadership and for pursuit of rights and so on. So very interesting examples of how interventions, use arts and culture to push specific thematic areas. Art for inspiring rights holders to make demands. So a kind of bottom-up approach, again, which we saw in Power 254, so that, again, giving people the inspiration to say, yeah, even us, we can actually do this. Even us, if they did it, we can also do it, and also just giving people the confidence that they can make demands on their own, instead of asking other people to intervene on their behalf, that they can actually become their own advocates. And this is the right approach in terms of building confidence and building movements from below. The use of visual and performing arts for advocacy on climate change, the Go Down Art Center, especially with Naini, who used that quite a bit, as well as the importance of opening up public spaces for creativity. So again, an interesting example from Naini. With regard to media institutions, the utilization of digital platforms for awareness creation and knowledge sharing. So awareness creation, that is bringing those issues that exist in communities but have not been subjected to reflection. So you are creating awareness within the communities about those issues so that they can deal with them. So it's almost bringing them to the surface. Of course, knowledge is deeper. It's now kind of processing the issues in a deeper way. So sharing knowledge, creating awareness, and so on, using digital platforms to do that. And the next do provide an interesting example of for learning in terms of, especially in phase one of the Wajigwetu. holding duty bearers to account through satire. Bunimedia are a classic example of how you can use satire, how you can use humor, really, to discuss some of these issues, where you're bringing shame, and a focus on a leadership that does not deliver on its mandate. And the Bunimedia do provide that example. The utilization of entertainment, education approaches, we saw that in Wajir Community Radio, utilization of drama, radio drama. Education, entertainment. Some people call it entertainment education. Others call it what? Edutainment. So there are all these variations. But the key thing is that you are blending entertainment with education. Normally the challenge is the percentage. What percentage you carry in entertainment and what percentage you carry in education, but it's then blending, which is a very important way of doing it. It's been tested in health, and it has been found to be working. It should be able to work in human rights. It should be able to work in democracy. It should be able to work in gender equality, because we have evidence from other thematic areas, especially health-related programming. Nurturing talent, again, we saw that in this is Alliance, ASMO, where they're doing very interesting work, training, young people in the informal settlements to use digital tools, photography and filming and so on. So really nurturing that in the informal settlements, and of course creating a for young people. So again, very interesting stuff. Agenda setting, investigative journalism for Africa Uncensored. Jonathan Nam, of course, continues doing very interesting stuff on setting the agenda, raising the questions, and then allowing other people, other institutions to pick up that and run with it. So these are interesting, interventions and tools that are being used by different people. As we mentioned, there are those institutions that are working using the conventional approaches, working in human rights and gender. And we saw that many of them use capacity building also, but of course also, you yourselves also do use knowledge and skills for accountability and so on. You build also resilience. I saw that with the pastoralists integrated support program, making sure that the communities themselves are strong enough, because they are working together in pushing for justice. So groups of women being able to are teaming up to work towards their rights. Participatory theatre for addressing shrinking civic space. Haki Africa, we saw that mainly around the coast, and building community partnerships to monitor violations, inform action, where the communities themselves in Nyeri, we saw that are actually recording violations, and recording that through video, and then you can use that now to do advocacy work. So, so the community members monitor violations themselves. Performing arts against radicalization, yes, Coast Women in Development using this again for purposes of minimizing radicalization, especially amongst women. In fact, what I found very interesting here is that quite often we think about the role of men in radicalization, but we don't think about the role of women in countering violent extremism. So it's very interesting that Coast Women in Development are using, the arts against radicalization of women. Creative arts for capacity building for women's economic empowerment, Akilidada, especially with regard to emerging leadership. Again, using creative arts to give confidence to women to seek leadership positions. And HIVA Fund, of course, funding certain activities. So that's very, very important. UPR Africa, using monitoring already tested tools to monitor and review interventions with the human rights lens. So it seems like these are some of the interventions that are being used. So let's just look a little bit at the motivation. Why are you doing the things you are doing? How relevant are those things to you? So we've seen the interventions that we're using and their relevance. Let's look at the motivation. It seems as if you are using these tools to advance your organization mission and vision. So you are aligning, your thematic area, whether it is gender or democracy or anti-radicalization or human rights with your own vision. In some cases, it's really supporting national efforts on CVE through a rights-based approach. If anybody reads the history of CVEs in Kenya, they will know that the approach, the early approach was very militarized. It was too much of police. It was too much security driven, other than bringing communities together. It was alienating communities and profiling communities and so on. But with the intervention of civil society organizations, the approach has become much more holistic. I think communities are now more involved in this, and therefore it seems that some of you are motivated in doing this work because you saw something wrong with the previous approach in regard to CVE, and therefore we wanted a much more community-driven approach. Implementation of gender empowerment within the constitutional provisions of the Constitution. Again, you see the state will do what it wants to do, especially if it's not checked. So you are pushing an approach which ensures that there is gender equality and that the constitutional provisions are adhered to, because left on its own, the state cannot do it. It's likely to continue being oppressive. Therefore, that's an important motivation, and we saw that in the pastoralist integrated program, CRU, Isiolo Gender Watch, ASDEF, and so forth and so on. Addressing apathy among women and youth in leadership through community platforms and community champions. Isiolo Gender Watch, we saw that there are community champions who push these ideas. So extremely, extremely critical. And the utilization of creative arts for consciousness raising, raising the consciousness of communities, as well as dialogue, as well as action. Again, Maye came through as an interesting example of how the arts are being used for consciousness raising, and a major motivation, because again, within the framework of the institution, it seems that they believed that the arts would be used to raise consciousness, and therefore you pick that as a tool because you believe that you can do that. In some cases, it's pursuit of good governance, integrity, and accountability. Again, to say, look, how can the media become a tool for purposes of increasing accountability and transparency in governance, other than just being a tool for information sharing? Can it be used to ask the critical questions about good governance? And Buni Media, African Uncensored are doing that rather in a very important way. Advancing the rights of vulnerable groups, especially people with disabilities, by giving them platforms to articulate themselves, to articulate their issues, and this ability utilizing the arts for doing that, or utilizing media in doing that. Establishing platforms for dialogue and governance in the communities, ASMO, so that community members themselves ask questions. So ASMO gives them that platform to ask questions and engage in dialogue. So this is the motivation for the project. Additional motivation relates to civic engagement with government. And we have seen much more recently, Haki Africa, CIPK, and others really working closely with public agencies and public institutions for much more inclusive, approaches to CVE. So an engagement that alienates civil society, an engagement that brings civil society as part of the solution, rather than as an enemy, of the state. The other motivation was the rise of human rights. Now, Reform Action told us, look, before, previously there was so much impunity, so much of human rights violation, and we needed to undertake this project so that we can contribute to minimizing these violations as well as impunity. Very, very good rationale for the intervention. Expansion of economic and leadership opportunities, the trainings that Akira Chicks are undertaking for women and so on, and youth, so that they can also access economic opportunities as well as leadership opportunities. Isiolo Gender Watch, Akira Chicks, as well as others. We have the word transversal nature of human rights. Now, normally when you talk about transversal nature of human rights, you're saying that human rights are cross-cutting, and that when you violate one right, you violate other rights. You don't look at rights in isolation. You look at as rights as interconnected, and so on. And that Haki Africa and others were motivated and inspired by the nature of human rights, so that even as you work on gender rights, you're also working on other rights that communities that affect communities. So, what are some of the tools that you all are using? I think that at this point, Jenny just mentioned that across the board, it seems as if you are integrating creative arts and conventional approaches. Seems like that is what is going on. Even when, and that you do find value in this integration, because the creative arts will achieve certain things, and the conventional approaches, such as capacity building and so on, will achieve other ends. So, with regard to creative tools, you're using performing arts, you're using audiovisual, digital media, and as well as visual arts, in this case, painting, graffiti, street graffiti, and so on. The conventional tools, you're using needs identification, for example, that before you get into your program, you assess what the needs of the community are. So you do a needs assessment, and then from needs assessment, then you create awareness, and you build capacity, and you do also action-based approaches, such as we have seen with the Youth Assembly undertaken by Kisumu Progressive Youth. So there is a research, there is awareness creation, knowledge sharing, but there's also action, such as the assembly and so on. Media institutions that are bent more towards media are also integrating creative and conventional approaches, and we have already mentioned these. I think the only thing we have not mentioned there is festivals, but these are also being used. The other approach is really targeted community dialogue forums, and so that you use, for example, a documentary as an entry into community dialogue. And again, Inform Action and others are using this approach. Creative tools used for human rights, gender, and governance. Again, I think we mentioned these, performing arts, digital media, visual arts. Some are actually publishing IEC materials, information education, communication materials, and so on. So we were also interested in finding out, are your beneficiaries or program participants? Because I always have a problem with the word beneficiary because it creates the same issue of there are those who benefit and others who don't benefit. I would rather call them program participants. Are program participants involved in the design of your work? Because this is about relevance also. And we found that they are involved in capacity development, public co-creation intervention. Sometimes you create alongside the, so that you are not creating in your office, you are also creating, with them as beneficiaries. The content is co-owned as it was. Sustainability. When you exit, they are able to continue, and so very, very interesting. Direct representation, collective action. So they are involved at that level. Again, collectively, very, very important that you're doing this. Media, just to mention here, consent approval, that before their voices, before their images are used, they approve that those images actually be used. And that is involvement. That's very, very important involvement. In certain cases, we have seen mentorship programs. We talked about co-creation and co-production. We collective action, protections, advocacy, litigation, local ownership, working, for example, with cultural groups and so on, so that they actually own the program. Really, really important. Self-help initiatives. I think I came across, efforts by youth groups to work together in self-help economic activities. So beyond relevance, we are also interested in effectiveness of interventions. How effective are your interventions? So one of the things that we saw with regard to gender equity is an increase in access to justice by women. So that in the case of, I think Kisumu, widows are organizing themselves to demand their rights. So that is really important, that because of the intervention, we have seen women organizing themselves, community reporting rights violations. I think I saw that in Wajir, where communities, women as well as men are actually reporting on gender-based violence themselves, and that's really, really important. Increase in the proportion of women in local administration. So started seeing more and more women in local leadership positions and local administration positions. Improved knowledge and ability of women to access market economy with regard to Akira Chick's IT skills and so on. Of course, you cannot, with this type of research, you cannot say X number of women have this number of skills, because that is not what we are trying to do. We're more interested in what are people saying, what are people telling us? And they are telling us that they have more knowledge and they are now able to access the market economy because of the interventions. We have also seen marked improvement in retention and transition of girls in education, especially in ASAL areas. The formation of girls clubs. I think I saw that. I know that was in Marsabit. I suspect I saw that or read the report around Marsabit, where girls clubs are also a very important platform for making sure that the girls stay in school. Increased self-enrollment of men and use of male involvement, so that men are becoming more interested in gender equality issues. Human rights, again, improvement in documentation of human rights violations, creation of safe spaces for citizens to freely express themselves, Kenyans on Twitter, and other platforms, other hashtags that citizens are using to push the agenda. So of course you cannot attribute all that to Wajibwetu. We are not in the business of attribution. We are saying this is what we are seeing with regard to work that is being done by the partners. The demanding respect for their rights, demanding involvement and due process accountability from law enforcement agencies. We've seen a lot of that in the coast, a lot of that with regard to CBE, issues of accountability, and so on. And I think that the more we interrogate the law enforcement agencies and the more we involve them in our issues, the more they realize that they must be more accountable than they have been in the past. With regard to emergence of civic culture, again, I think there is more sensitivity to what is the right thing and what is the wrong thing in terms of duty bearers. It seems like citizens are starting to demand their rights much more aggressively than they were doing before. Better relationship and knowledge on how to engage the authorities. That there are diverse ways of engaging authorities, sometimes confrontational, sometimes less confrontational, and more of engagement, and the benefits of doing that. Social audit and accountability forums. Again, we've seen quite a bit of that in terms of effectiveness. In terms of efficiency, we already talked about that the involvement of beneficiaries or rights holders and the use of existing structures and infrastructures which are already found in the communities, and that strengthens collaboration and much more efficient that way. With the fact, I think there is definitely better knowledge, more access to information, and more cohesive societies through dialogue. So we've seen that you having impacts in terms also of resilience in the communities, more confidence on issues of gender. There's improvement in reporting of cases before than it was before. Change of perceptions and attitudes toward gender-based violence, where more men are feeling like it's also their responsibility, and more women taking up leadership roles, and we are seeing mentorship initiatives. Enhanced capacity among citizens to demand access to quality services as part of democracy. And again, these are as a result of more civil society organizations working together. Okay, integration of cross-cutting issues. Let me just mention here that with regard to environment and climate change, we saw only a few organizations working there, and especially those organizations whose mandate is principally environment and climate change, whether that's Dadilion or Naivasha and so on. Not everybody is working on the cross-cutting issues, but we did see that. So our communities are getting empowered. As you can see, they're feeling more confident that they can change things. I think this is Baringo, the Delion, one of the events. Very interesting.
Yeah, they were distributing sanitary towels to girls in the community.
Yeah.
And that is actually the chief's office. So one of the things is working with the local administration to engage the community. I guess it kind of links to the sustainability of that, of the project. Yeah.
Absolutely. For sustainability, I think that we just talk about 3 levels of sustainability: the individual level, the community level, as well as the institutional level. At the individual level, I think that through your knowledge and awareness creation, you have given individuals, Kenyan citizens, the knowledge they require to continue operating in their environment. And that means, therefore, that the work you are doing is sustainable because that knowledge is already integrated, in your target audience. So even after you exit, you not exit with the knowledge. You leave the knowledge behind. And therefore, there's always a tendency to assume that sustainability refers to other things other than even just the knowledge. That you have to have something physical that continues. But if you give knowledge and you give awareness, your target groups will continue using that knowledge and that awareness even after you have left. And therefore, your intervention is sustainable because the knowledge does not cease with your exit. The knowledge continues, the behavior continues. At the institutional level, there are cases where partners have signed commitments on gender mainstreaming, by government, and that, especially the county government, and that is very, very important because it basically means that you can use the commitment to hold the county government to account. The application of principles and values of good governance, the county CBE mechanisms. We saw that in Kwale. I think there's quite a bit of that. The CBE mechanisms for CBE, and our inputs into the county integrated development plans. I mean, once you have provided that input through your mechanisms, then it means that it's actually sustainable. The e-content that you produce and you put online continues being there. It doesn't exit at the end of your project, and people will be utilizing it. So it is sustainable. The project is sustainable or is contributing to behavior and knowledge in a sustainable way because you don't remove that content once the project comes to an end. So the question that we are always asked, so how sustainable is your project? The project will be sustainable to the extent that you don't exit with everything. But later we will be talking about the need for systematic investment in sustainability. Very, very systematic investment. We have seen rescue centers and rehabilitation centers and community dialogue forums. Even after the project is over, the rescue centers will continue being there. The rehabilitation centers will continue being there. The dialogue platforms that we have established through this will continue being there. Therefore, the project is actually sustainable. Institutions are gaining internal operational and technical capacities for further fundraising and development of more concepts. So internally, in your own institutions, you are developing. It's not like you are a conduit for the transmission of Wajibwetu programming without you also being affected by it. You are also growing in the process of implementing the project. You are growing, you are building your own internal capacities. And of course, as usual, I think Forum C would always be very happy to support additional capacity development of your institutions. And again, we'll be coming to a little bit of that. At the community level, sustainability, there is, of course, deliberate engagement for community ownership and continuity. So long as our communities are involved from conception through implementation and evaluation of our projects, they will own the project and they will continue even without us. The problem always is when you over-monetize. Once you treat it as a financial transaction between your organization and the community, then it's not sustainable. But if you remove the financial component or you minimize it and you treat it as an opportunity for growth in the community will own it, they'll continue with it even after you have exited. There are also cases, again, you told us this, that there is investment in volunteerism, in some of your projects where you deliberately work with communities to volunteer their time to deliver. So again, that ensures sustainability. And collaboration with CBOs. Now this is, for me, it's so important that the work we do ought to be driven very consciously with community-based organizations. Not as weak partners, but as equal partners with us. And again, you told us that you're working with community-based organizations, some of them. And that, for us, reads sustainability of the project. So as you can see, we are saying, in other words, that even at the expiry of the Watigwetu project, if it comes to an end, you have had impact to the extent that there is going to be continuity, Because what happens with the arts, they have a sense of permanence. You see, the songs that we learned when we were young people, I think we still remember them, don't we? Bobby Shaffer, don't you see Silver, because on his knees, she'll come back and marry me. That's how we sang as kids. We were singing Bobby Shaffer. You don't forget the creative arts. You stay with those forever. So, so the kind of rather quite sustainable in that way. And a good example of how government gets involved in some of our projects, again, is a partnership with government or public institutions. I think this is in Barino.
Yeah. Mm. So the gentleman in the middle is the local chief, and they are distributing. It's the same event as
Yeah.
They're distributing sanitary towels.
Yeah. So, what are we learning? I'll take this couple of slides, and then we'll transition. What are we learning? We are learning that the arts do provide leverage to address sensitive cultural issues. This is what we're learning. That the arts do provide leverage. They provide leverage because they target the cognitive and affective domains. The cognitive domain referring to the mind, referring to the knowledge, the affective domain referring to the emotional connection with the issue. So they provide leverage, unique leverage. We are also learning that they build emotional connections, and therefore issues of trust, issues of empathy with the issues of connection with those whose rights are violated. So that men, for example, become directly involved in women's issues because they can feel, the world of women by experiencing it, vicariously, experiencing it through the process. That connection, the artistic connection, forces us to enter the world of the other in a manner that you do not enter if you are just subjected to statistics. So that's what we are learning. They're also learning that our partners are strengthening the continuum of behavior change. So the continuum of behavior change begins with awareness creation. You cannot solve a problem until you are able to see it, to think about it. You cannot solve it until you see it as a problem. Once you bring it to the level of awareness, you are aware of the problem, then that's the beginning of solving it. So our work in awareness creation seems to be to elevate community issues to a level of awareness, to a level of contemplation about those problems, and then a collective exploration of the solutions, so that we are not imposing our solutions on the communities. We are working with the communities to come up with the possible solutions. That's why you have participatory theater, because in the participatory theater, you have created a platform for collective, exploration of the solutions. And the practice of the behavior. And I think this is an important one, because I haven't seen a big investment in it. I think that the youth, the assemblies, the modeling of the assemblies is almost an example of the practice of that behavior. Almost as if you are saying, this is how the assembly should look like. These are the issues that, should be discussed at the assembly level. The idea here is that to strengthen the continuum of behavior change, we must model behavior. We must be able to amplify the behavior that we'd like to see, to amplify the type of institutions we would like to see, to provide examples of what we would like to see, almost like our best case scenarios. And we are able to do that through the creative process. We can, in fact, through the imagination, create best case scenarios. In the drama, we can provide contrasts, the existing situation and what is also possible if we work together in terms of resolving the issues. So we are strengthening this continuum of behavior change as well as institutional change. And we are also using multi-pronged approaches, and that's actually using multi-pronged approaches in addressing complex issues is the way to go. We have just learned that, again from you, that it is the utilization of creative approaches and conventional approaches that will deliver the results. It's not either or, it's actually both. To deliver gender equality, it's both men and women. That male involvement is as important as women's involvement. That to bring about deepened democracy, we must work with public institutions, but also work with communities. We must work downstream, but also upstream. So this is what we are learning again from the work that you are doing. That it's not a singular approach that will deliver the results. The one thing that we should also have mentioned, and I think we'll mention towards the end, is the utilization of different languages. Languages, our community languages, sharing Kiswahili, our national language, English, and so on. This multiplicity of languages, very, very important. And we also know that film is a language, painting is a language, All these are languages, so how do we use this? And that we are learning that it's these multi-pronged approaches that deliver. Youth empowerment, we are learning that investing in the youth is really critical to bring about fundamental societal changes, especially if you look at the youth demography, where you have over 65% of the population at under 35 years old. What does that actually mean? That we must invest in the youth. If you're talking about socio-economic and political transformation of our country, and that funding, that points towards this empowerment is necessary. We are learning that women empowerment is possible through the use of arts, because it will help build confidence to challenge harmful cultural practices. Because you see, the arts allow us to go into very delicate cultural practices in a very sensitive and non-threatening manner. Through song, you can talk about female genital mutilation in a manner that you cannot talk about it in a seminar. You know. So and leadership and the deconstruction of masculinity, that you can actually do that through arts and culture as well as media. We are learning that county governments can partner with civil society organizations, especially if their capacity is built. You see, we know that the bureaucrats in the county government and national government may not have contemplated these issues. They may not have thought about human rights. They may not have thought about democracy. They may not have thought about gender equality. But we have a responsibility of building their capacity so that they can move, with the rest of society and address these issues, so that they see us as agents of change, not as people who are interested in destroying them. Again, working with them, building points of convergence and so on. But of course, holding them to account, on behalf of our constituents. Building political will. I feel quite sad when the creative sector is only mobilized for purposes of entertainment by the political class. I think that we have to debunk it. The creative sector is not an entertainment sector. It is a serious sector that raises fundamental issues about our country. And therefore, getting political will and commitment to help us navigate the challenges that we face. And the arts can actually be used for that purpose. Now, we are also learning that the tools that we use, whether those tools relate to film, whether they relate to visual arts, painting, whether they relate to theater and so on, ought to be aligned with audience, age, gender, and cultural context. Again, it does not make sense to ask an institution that is working in the rural areas with the communities to only work digitally, when we know very well that our communities do not have access to digital platforms, either because they are too expensive or they are not just reachable, or there is issues of illiteracy. So we align our tools. We align our tools, and that's why sometimes participatory theater, which does not require, a high level of literacy, it's presented in the local language, could actually be a useful tool. Or the use of other forms, music, and so on. So we align our tools, and this is what we are learning again. Make the tools sensitive to the age and the gender, as well as the cultural context. Flexibility and adaptability. So again, diversification, I think we've mentioned this. Community involvement, absolutely. That our tools and strategies will succeed if they find wider community involvement, So takes us back to, at what point do you involve, your audiences? And we are learning that you involve them right from the beginning from the needs assessment stage. Of course, there is the issue of COVID-19 and whether our tools are responsive to COVID-19 pandemic, and how are we adapting the tools, you know, to the COVID situation, you know, because it's about us being sensitive, extremely sensitive to the context in which we work, because we should not allow COVID-19 to kind of undermine the progress that we are making. I think that we know that it has undermined progress to a significant degree, but we should still be able to contain the effects of COVID-19 by becoming more innovative and creative in the ways in which we deliver. I think that kind of takes us to the issue of recommendations. And before I get to that, I want to pause. You can see what you can see. So we've looked at the findings and what we are learning from all of you. Are we learning properly? Are we? Is this what you guys are doing? You know, we could also just be doing our analysis and Kumbe, this is not what you guys are doing. This is what you are doing? Yes. Can I get some comments, general comments on any of the issues? Nakaribu-san.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Steve, it's a Stephen, eh?
Evans.
Yeah, Evans, yeah.
Yeah, my question is really about like, was Kwacha involved in this research, because I don't see Kwacha.
You see, as I mentioned, in the big report, in the narrative report, you will find more information, including Kwacha's own contribution. And I did mention at the beginning that we are not able to mention everything that each organization has done. But I know that Kwacha is in the report, in the narrative report. This is just a summary. It's a summary report. The big report is over 70 pages. This is just a summary, and Kwacha is there. Is there something specific you'd like to see?
No.
Yeah, but it's there. I know it's there because we wrote it. It's there. I know it's there.
We interviewed. We worked with Karen for the interview. Yeah. So yeah.
It's there. It's there. So this is. So we are giving you a holistic picture. We're giving you a holistic picture. That captures as much as we could, you know, in terms of whatever. But the longer report, I don't know what to call it a report really, but the longer documentation captures, including quite a number of quotes. You can see we don't even have quotes. We have quite a number of quotes of what you said in the bigger report, which will continue growing. We are still improving it. As we learn, you know, because we are still learning, and the project is still ongoing. I think we'll finish the whole project around February. Well, not the report itself, around February. So, you know, there is still time for any gaps that we might see. But just be comfortable, it's there. Yeah, I know it's there. Any other comment, question? Is this helpful? You know, I don't, you know, me, I'm a mwalimu. I might just be going. Yes, Michael.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prof. I already see some of the issues we are going through as power in the report, reflected in the report. Like, I would say, like, for example, the issues of community involvement is very, very key, because sometimes when we go out to implement some of our projects, we have certain strategies that we are very sure are going to work. Then you go to a certain community and they tell you, Papa, that will not work. And then they are able to offer solutions as well. They tell you, okay, here, why don't we try this? And when you take that on board, then you realize it does work. So I think it's good that you were able to capture that, because a lot of times when you engage, especially the development partners, especially on these non-conventional methods, they are like, but you see the community has its own dynamics. So I think it's good that you're able to capture that. And also the effects of COVID-19, everyone was affected. Because this is something that just happened at once, and organizations were forced to adapt. Yeah. So all of a sudden you cannot meet. All of a sudden you cannot have public forums. But you see, you have your targets, your activities that you can set out to accomplish within a specific period of time. And it's true, there's need to align our strategies and tools to reflect the current reality. Because right now, the projections you're being told about COVID-19, you may be here for the next 2 years. So if we cannot adapt, what does that mean for us? And it's not easy to adapt. I remember there was a time we were doing a training as Power, and now we told the community, we call them project participants, to now we can't do our training at Mageuzi, so we have to do it online. And it was hilarious at the beginning, how people are fiddling, somebody wants to speak, they don't know where the microphone is. But over time, people adapt and come to know how to work this out. So I think the report is a mirror image of what you're going through, and I can't wait for the final report.
Thank you, Michael, for that. And also just to say, it is absolutely true, the fact that sometimes community members, the project beneficiaries, become the drivers of your projects, other than you, who is the grantee. They can actually drive the schedule of your activities. And I think that level of flexibility is what we are also asking our development partners to help us with. That sometimes you have a work plan which you cannot stick to because of the nature of the work that you do. So, yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah?
Yeah, I actually like two things you captured in the lessons learned. The first one being on empowerment.
Can you just add a little volume?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like the fact that you captured two key issues in the lessons learned. The first one is on youth empowerment, where the focus should now be addressed to community-based organizations, because a number of community-based organizations are actually youth-led organizations. If we focus more on those structures, then we are going to effect change really fast. The other aspect is on involvement of county leaders in our processes. You see, I come from a county where politics is the order of the day. So they can easily confuse an advocacy work with politics. So you have to really make sure that you are working and making sure that those duty bearers don't see you as an alternative opposition or force that is challenging the past structures from the grassroots going on.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. I think that there is something that I just want to underline what you have said, that we as civil society organizations ought to start learning how to engage with duty bearers. And there are multiple ways of doing it, depending on your situatedness. There are some times when you need to be extremely aggressive in terms of this is your responsibility, and so on. But there are certain times when you have to be much more consultative. And I think that we must learn the style that best delivers for us. There are moments when we need to build partnership for the aggressive approach. Because some institutions are better placed to take the more aggressive approach because they are situated that way. Whereas others might not be able to take that aggressive approach because of their location. So it's very important for us to consciously, very, very consciously, build partnerships and discover our strengths as well as our weaknesses, our situatedness and appropriateness to advance a particular approach, a particular methodology compared with other institutions. And for us to respect the multiple approaches, without being too prescriptive. Because when you are engaging with county governments, again, this came through in the various interviews. Sometimes you have to really work with them so that you push your issues into the CIDP. But if they are extremely hostile, it becomes, they will also take a very defensive position. So you'll not be able to achieve much. So how do we do civic engagement in a manner that we are strategic in terms of staying focused on the end result, other than the short-term results. And what type of partnerships can we build and knowledges can we enhance within our own institutions to be able to engage in multiple ways. So I think I really wanted to underline what Duncan has said because it's something that we keep struggling with all the time. And especially where you are feeling a little impatient and angry at the pace at which change is happening in our society. You can be very impatient. So how do you build patience? And I think there's quite a bit to learn from the work that has been done on countering violent extremism at the coast by Haki Africa, Maye, and others, and the imams, and the Council of Imams, and so on. As well as, and on Friday we will be talking a little bit about the type of partnerships. I think we'll be talking with the conventional CSOs on why they need to invest in working with you guys, more, not as a conduit to their content, but actually as partners, strong partners. Any additional comment? Yes, George. Yeah, come to you.
I don't know. Maybe you mentioned the issue of attribution, and maybe you could talk more about how we could these lessons, build them in our program so that we can actually be able to attribute the work that we are doing to the changes that we are seeing in society. I want to give a small example. We were having a discussion about NLD, and then of course one organization said in 2017 we mobilized communities and they answered the issue of Bunge la Wananchi, and it was very nice. People participated, there was a lot of learning, and after the election that took place, all the MCAs in that county lost their positions because the citizens saw that they were not doing anything, so they voted them out. And I was thinking during that time, we did not have a Bunge la Wananchi in Kiambu, but there was also a similar phenomenon. So I could see that may not have been a linear attribution. So what I'm asking, I know you are not trying to attribute, but how do we then link social change to what we are doing, and what measure and what degree can we do that?
And especially in a context where there are many players.
Yes.
So you have very many players. You are all, we are all working in the same area. Let me say this, and I'll ask Matthew to make a comment after I've made my comment. I've been personally I've been very uncomfortable about individual attributions to change in society. And this is a result of the recognition that change happens as a result of very many players and contexts. Maybe you step in as an implementing institution at a point where the community was just on the tipping point, and that you stepped in and you flipped it. So you stepped in at the right time because the community was ready to flip, and all you did was to accelerate that process. They flipped and they are able to change and whatever. So to what extent do you say that you are the reason why this change happened? You just happen to be there at the right time and you flipped it. So I personally have been very uncomfortable with this scientific approach of attributing change to particular institutions and activities. So let me give you an example of what we did once when I used to work with. So we were asked to show evidence. We were designing radio dramas in the Caribbean islands, in an island called St. Lucia. And we were interested in, so we were told, give us evidence at the end of this that you contributed towards change in St. Lucia. I was then helping with the design of the drama in terms of script writing. So you know what we're going to do? We are going to introduce a word that is not used in this island. We'll see how it resonates. So, because it was reproductive health, we decided to call the condom a catapult. Okay? So, in the drama, we introduced the term catapult as the word for the condom. And the word spread so much that a manufacturing company decided to make condoms called the catapult. So we would say that we had that level of change, to the extent that this is attributable only to the use of the term in our radio serial drama. It took like 2 years. So, 2 programs, two shows per week for 2 years to get that level. So there are creative approaches that one could inject into the programming to be able to see the change. Of course, sometimes you do a baseline. So you do your baseline, you see where you are, and then you check later, have we gotten there, have we not gotten there, and so on, and to what extent is my program mentioned as, by the participants as a factor, and so on. But personally, I have been very, and especially when one is dealing with the creative sector, to say that the creative sector must show evidence attributable to itself for the changes that occur in society. We already said that we work in the domain of knowledge, so we enhance knowledge when we do that, and we can show evidence that people are much more knowledgeable than they were before. We also work with the emotion and the connection and the trust and the confidence and so on. How do you quantify confidence? You say that people are more confident than they were before, and the courage. You could, by building a monitoring instrument with a program design, which then you track as you move forward. But always recognizing that change is a consequence of many players. In Tanzania, what we did was to control the intervention. So we exposed the country to our program and shut off part of the country to the airwaves. Because again, we were being told you have to show evidence. So we ran the program everywhere except Dodoma. And then tested the results. Dodoma was huku chini, the rest of the country was up there. So you could say, yes, this is because we shut it off. But then there is a question, a fundamental question. What is it ethical to deny members of society, community, information on account of science, just because you want to prove a point? Dodoma had every right to access that information. But because the development partner required evidence, that community was denied information. Now, as an implementer, you have to weigh, your principles in terms of, okay, is it ethical? It's not ethical. But you can shut the area. We shut the area for 6 months to allow the program to go throughout the country. So, in other words, I'm telling you that there are innovative ways of doing it, but at a personal level, I am always very uncomfortable. I would rather be given resources to work and to be trusted that the work I'm doing is good work, without being asked to show evidence that it's good work. Why should you doubt me? Give me the resources to do participatory theater in the areas where I work, and trust me, because I believe in these issues, that we are going to bring about change. But of course, that is a big problem on the other side. Matthew, do you want to make a comment about this issue? Because it's an ongoing issue, it's a challenge through and through.
Yeah, I don't know if I am to say anything, I can say all that. But it's true. I think it's something that we are always struggling with. And more often than not, we push support to get results and sort of not being patient to realize those results. But I want to pose a challenge to all of us, because yes, as you said, from the example you gave about Roma and all that, it was more driven by the development partner that they wanted to see through. But again, the person who understands that that's more is the person on the ground, and that would be the likes of us and also the people of that. I think for me, I will share with you the same thought, that the aspect of acquisition would be something that would not really be, because even within the partnership, we've always asked if we are to do this. We've always wanted to see, demonstrate to us how is that related to your own work. And I think for the period we've been accepting for just that context specific change. Picking for ASPO, for example, explain to us the context. How was it? And how does that small little milestones that achieved directly link to you? And what does it mean to you? Like, explain that change within your context, because you may not understand the context. I'll give an example, for example, for one of the examples that we keep talking about is the first female to be elected in Isiolo, that is Fatuma Abdul. If you go to accounts where women being elected in Singapore, and you grab a whole as a result, it will not mean anything, because there are women all over that being elected. But if you go to a specific county like Isiolo, there has never been a woman, and that woman being elected from there, that means a lot to that context. So I think contextualizing and attributing that the small milestones. And I like something from about the draft conceptual framework shared. Mapping out the different parameters of where we need to see this. And looking at the column number 3 of the immediate effects, I think this is where most of us will be able to anticipate this. We can be able to show that. And because we are directly engaging the audiences that we have, be able to display that aspect of trust by example, or even that indicated efficacy by being able to express yourself, being able to do this. I think mostly for us, looking at those small milestones and being able to link to the broader aspects. So the only thing I should do is link it to leading to that. But I agree with you, it's a discussion that we and I understand, even for all of us here, it's a struggle that we've always been asking ourselves and struggling to find those results. But again, there are those partners and organizations who have been able to clearly map out that this is what collectively we brought this in terms of something substantial, but also the small bits and pieces of milestones that we achieved in that process.
Absolutely. So in the case of ASMO, for example, you are working in the area of digital literacy and capacity development, photography and so on. So you say, okay, where are we focusing? We are doing this work in Mathare. Okay? So how many photographers do you have in Mathare? Professional, guys who are able to actually earn a living on the basis of photography. So you know that this is the number, 100. Okay? Then you bring in now your intervention because you have the number 100 as the takeoff. So you build capacity, okay? And you track because you build a monitoring system. You track the number of people that you have trained, and then you go back to them to find out who is actually continuing to do whatever. If the number shoots to about, and all of them have gone through your hands, they've gone through your classroom. Say 6 months, since you began, if you have 200, you could actually be able to say that you have multiplied by 100% the number of young people that have taken photography in Mathare, that are actually using online platforms because of the training that you have given them. And therefore, you can be able to talk about securing livelihoods on the basis of your intervention. So it's really also how you build a monitoring capacity within your own institution. And not to be too ambitious, because sometimes it's just something little that you can show that this actually came from us. And you don't have to show the whole, you don't have to claim the whole world. You just claim that which you think applies to your situation. But I think this is something that, because we have the opportunity to keep building understanding with our development partners, we have to keep encouraging them to work with the creative sector differently and really to support us without expecting us to be to fit into the log frames that are traditional, and to allow us to be much more innovative in terms of how we report. Because if I shot a documentary of testimonies of people who have experienced my journey, that should be enough evidence of testimonials, really, of impact. And I think the example that Matthew gave about absence of members of parliament and intervention, and then you generate that. Or we can say we have X number of governors, women governors in the country, and that we're doing a lot of pushing for women leadership. If we double that number, then this is the result of the interventions and so on. Or where we have, like in Wajir, where we have men standing up in defense of women's rights, where there were no opportunities like that. Again, you are able to say, well, this is a result of the drama programs that we have been developing. So I think that I think you are getting there, George.
Yeah.
A little bit. Yeah. Evans, yeah, come to you.
Yeah, for me, I think to claim results also depends with the design of your program. At the same time, the place which you're taking your program to. Because, for example, if you're working in Mombasa town and your project is geared towards youth empowerment, there's a lot of players for doing youth empowerment within that area. But if you map your program in a place where you feel like there's less partners who are working in that area, and also you become more creative. You talked about the issue of the condom, because also sometimes our activities, we give them normal names. The normal names of the other old organization, or the culture of just saying this is a community forum. But if you come up with a creative way of giving your activities creative names, then it will be one day somebody will say, I got this from this program, or this activity. That will give you the sense of like, yes, this is my activities, and we did this as an organization, and this was the name of our activity. So it will, you can easily claim this person maybe got this empowerment through our activities.
Absolutely. So injecting creativity in the program itself, and then you track it. You have to follow it, and you track it. Yeah, Nick.
Yes, thank you. First, like talk about ways of the job well done. Actually, as an art social change connection, this is very insightful and opens our eyes, to look deep into what we are doing in the cultural arts. One thing that I'm particularly interested in is the component of how arts is used for research. Yeah, like for example, we have as part of action research that uses the paper for press as another collection of the mechanism. I think it was mentioned during the interviews by our players in Mombasa. So I don't know, I'm seeing this, missing maybe seeing the major reports. And it's very important also because that keeps actually what artists use to their collection. Creates a conducive environment for young people, especially those who are crying, they're able to engage, feeling the atmosphere. And as you compare with the professional way of doing research, the top-bottom approach, question the others, asking questions that, all right, I won't say that gives kind of false information to the ground, but young people tend to have the fear factor. They end up creating stories that are not real in society.
Absolutely, I think that yes, absolutely, and I think that's a very important observation, Nick. The extent to which the arts themselves can become instruments of research. Again, because we are shifting thinking and the way knowledge gets constructed. We are saying that the questionnaire may not necessarily be the right approach for getting information, because again of literacy levels and so on, and that may be a creative piece, could be the one that elicits and the conversation around the creative piece, so that you have a creative piece, then you have conversations around it and what it means and so on, and interpret that in terms of people's perceptions and attitudes about the issue, and then you go and use that as so the research the research is driven by information extracted through an artistic piece. And it is true that this is a very important way of also appreciating the creative sector. I'm sure that it is in the larger report. Again, the reversal of how knowledge becomes possible. You know, there is, and in fact, you see, we are talking about the decolonization of knowledge production. Huh? When we talk about decolonization of knowledge production, we are saying that the assumption that knowledge production takes place in a particular way. For example, that knowledge can only be produced by people who have gone to school. We are saying that that is a wrong assumption, and we need to decolonize that. And to say that knowledge is located in different parts of our society and is not tied to formal education. You know. And so it's one of the decolonization agenda. And I like that comment. It's a very important comment of methodologies. Sometimes you research through stories, ethnographies, you know, and so on. Not necessarily questionnaires. Just immersing yourself in the community and listening to the community and extracting that information from the community every day and writing it as stories. And from those stories, then you can form something uniform. This morning, I was reading a story from, I think it was Tharaka-Nithi, either Tharaka-Nithi, one of those places around the Mount Kenya region that does female genital cutting. And the elders are saying, reduce the bride price, the dowry for circumcised women. Reduce it. So that you fight genital mutilation. Because if the dowry is low, then it means that the value is less. So men will discourage, because they're interested in the money, they will discourage the female genital cutting on account of the low dowry. So that is the solution they have come up with. You know, again, you can do research. What does that tell us? And that you will never get that. You'll never get that perspective from a questionnaire. You'll get it by engaging with the communities. So good comment. Is there any other comment? Yes.
We have some of our partners who are watching us live on YouTube. So we have Rona Foundation. I'm just trying to go back to some of the comments, and Rosalind was mentioning, Rosalind from Rona Foundation, they work with widows in Siaya County and other counties. So using a cultural tool such as song and dance to drive cultural change. They also mentioned that at Rona Foundation, they have learned to let the program participants drive the agenda, or I think, contribute to the program design, so that it offers ground up solutions. Yeah, so that's Rona Foundation. Then from Marsabit, this is SACU Accountability Forum, just saying that they are following us live. And Hiva Fund also saying that they are following us live.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, we did mention the Rona Foundation with regard to women and the widows, and the ways in which the widows have become champions, and SACU, of course, and Hiva Fund for the work especially they are doing in terms of building capacity, as well as opening up the market for especially women and youth. And of course, that's so important. Really happy that they are following up this conversation. We have another comment. Yes, Halima, you had a comment.
I had a concern. We have been dealing with communication and media, and our biggest challenge is audience reach. And nowadays, each organization is asking for what is your audience reach, and sometimes it becomes very difficult to harvest. What is your audience reach? So how do you advise you have the experience?
Yes, that's very, very good question, Halima. How do you deal with audience reach? Again, this is a challenge that our partners need to deal with. Because we know that the more localized an intervention is, the more impact it will have. We know that. We know that you think globally, but you work locally. The fact that you are reaching a smaller population does not necessarily mean that you are not having an impact. Okay? So Halima works with Wajir Community Radio on issues of gender equality and women's rights generally. I think that my response to you would be as follows. One, that you have the radio platform which you use to do your dramas. You need to ask yourself, and that's the important, so you work in that platform. You need to ask yourself, what other spin-offs from the drama can you come up with so that you extend your reach? For example, is it possible that your radio drama can be listened to differently by audiences that are not located where you are reaching? You see, I would, for example, say that there are across Kenya networks of women groups, and I don't know if that's the case in Wajir, where you have formations, community formations, where people actually meet. Is it possible that from your radio program you can insert it in conversations in whatever form, in a slightly different form, as a point of conversation in the community, in the community groups that exist, whether they are organic in the sense of they have formed themselves out, without your intervention, or which you actually encourage the formation of. In the other days, we used to have, I'm saying other days, when I was deeply involved in radio theater, we used to have what we call radio listening groups. And the way to do it is we would actually put our content on tapes, and then take those to communities, before the women groups start discussing their merry-go-round. They will actually discuss, a drama we have created. So I think it's to ask yourself, what also exists around you? What type of platforms exist around you which you can actually utilize? Is it possible that your content becomes an point of entry into a public baraza, for example, where you're working with leadership to make it possible for this to happen? If you're working with if there is a group that's able to dramatize and put this on video, is it possible for that to be shown in public spaces, on walls, not necessarily, in theaters, in public forums, and so on? You see where I'm going. So I'm saying it's like, is it possible for your project to have spin-offs, to have other, manifestations other than what the singular form that you have? And I really would like to just keep emphasizing that the demand for large audiences is also an unfair demand, really. I think that we will not effect change if we focus on the big numbers. Sometimes it's the small numbers that drive change. So you have the smaller group that drives change, and then it keeps growing, because if we focus too much on the large audiences, then we are in the domain of mass media, other than the alternative media, and we know the limitations of mass media. Just good for awareness creation, but not for behavior change. I think behavior change happens much more locally, and so on. I hope that's helpful, Halima. Yeah. Okay, can we transition to something else?
Yes.
Good. So, we are now in the domain of recommendations. What we see, again, just going through your activities, what we see as recommendations, viable recommendations that we can carry home with us. The first one is exploring opportunities for sector continued learning from best practices. That we must be a learning sector. We must always learn and improve ourselves. And we do this consciously, deliberately. It should not just be one-off, very deliberate that we are always improving ourselves, especially within the context of COVID-19, which has really shifted our approaches and our audiences. It has really shifted us. So what can we learn? And we recommend, for example, peer-to-peer learning, where we are learning from each other. So we are teaching each other things. I mean, I would like to learn more about these assemblies, community assemblies. I saw that in Bunge, Kiambu. They also have, is it Bungela County or something like that, which is really like community-driven Bunges, and they push things, and also that's happening in Kisumu. The girls' rights forums. I think that I saw that most likely in Marsabit and other places. I think it was Sakwa. So learning, we continue learning from each other. We should strengthen linkages and build broad-based partnerships and networks. So the argument here is that the Wajibwe partners are involved in shifting power. We are shifting power upstream, isn't it? We are trying to shift power. We are involved in social justice. We are involved in fairness and the creation of a fair society. But for us to succeed, we must have partnerships with not just within our own sector, but even beyond our sector. And the importance of building coherence in messages. You see, as our Wajibwe partner, we cannot have one partner arguing against gender equality and another one pushing for gender equality. I mean, there must be some kind of coherence, isn't it? So that we are mutually supporting each other, and that's where the learning continues to be important. That an institution working on gender issues can provide support to an institution that is working in CBE but does not have a gender component. That we are mutually supportive of each other, and we are learning from each other, and that we are building coherence in terms of the messages that we give, that we are not contradicting. We are not contradicting each other. The diversification and replication. So we are saying that there are different art forms and media forms that are usable. Some are more successful than others. So we need to diversify. If you're using participatory theater and you haven't used the spoken word, it might be an opportunity now to have a spoken word component in your work. Maybe you use other forms, but you have not used, short films. Maybe it's an opportunity to use the short film, and so on. So we diversify, the offerings that the creative sector gives us. Explore other forms, especially in rural areas. Explore broader audiences, and explore community media. Because community media is cheap, it's located right where people are. And also explore use of local languages. So local languages reach people at the emotional level. So programming only in English is problematic. We should be able to program also in our local languages, because it's not the languages that are a problem, it's what we put in the languages. You can advance human rights in the local language, but also undermine human rights in the local language, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's not the language that's the problem, it's what we put in. So it's always to put in the right content, advancing human rights, deepening democracy, pushing for equality. Now, so we have recommendations also for development partners, and that, of course, would include our colleagues at Forum Seed. Really to explore value addition, and to recognize that arts and culture, not just arts, culture, media, as well as the hybrid institutions that Duncan talked about, that they add value to what the conventional institutions actually do, and that we need to be able to invest in them, and that we should explore how our arts, culture, and media institutions are able to do this, especially to the extent that they are able to address politically sensitive issues such as FGM, radicalization, in a soft way, at the community level. And the issue of role modeling, we know that the best learning takes place where people can see symbols of success, between them. So that if you have an MP, a woman MP who is actually delivering, that will give more courage and confidence to other women to contest, because they can see a role model. So investing in role models, and also in our own creative journey, trying as much as we can to try and give best case scenarios and role models. For development partners, also supporting and strengthening CSO networks, because we believe that there is power in collaboration and joint programming. I think there is nothing wrong in funding individual organizations, but there is nothing also wrong in funding, networks, so long as those networks are pushing in the same direction and that they have an arrangement of how they deliver. So this collaborative support is also another way of delivering on the mandate. Institutional development. Our institutions are also a little weak. Sometimes they require capacity. They require certain departments to be strengthened. And so funding for institutional development is also really, really important. And that can be done deliberately. I think that development partners must be also in the business of strengthening civil society, not weakening civil society. Helping develop those institutions. For ourselves, this is, of course, Toyota Communications is one of the partners. What we need to do. So we are saying we should be flexible and we should diversify the tools that we use for social change. We should be more agile. We should be more multifaceted, and we should go upstream, going to the root cause, the fundamental structures, and we should go downstream to individual behavior and communication campaigns and so forth and so on. So we go upstream to root cause, okay? To root cause. So we should be interested in governance. because that is upstream. We should be interested in policy change. That is upstream. We should be interested in legislation, because again, that is upstream. But we also work downstream. Because just working downstream is not enough. Because you see, the problem continues. The root cause, if you do not address the root cause, you will always be in the business of fighting fires. Isn't it, guys? So if you're saying that gender-based violence is a consequence of patriarchy, okay? That our structure as a patriarchal society undermines gender equality. So we must address issues of patriarchy. Because that is, if you're talking about marginalization, it's a consequence of resource allocation and bad governance and bad leadership. This is root cause. This is upstream. So we must go upstream. We must go upstream. So this is what we are saying, that as Wajibwe partners, again coming from what you guys did. Because, we saw you working in all these ways, and clearly it seems as if we must pay attention to these spaces. Community-driven approaches, I don't need to go back to this as a commission. I think we have really discussed this, and we have said that the more grassroots-based, the more consultative, the more engaging the project will be, and the more we are likely to gain acceptance and inspire communities. So let us locate our work within the communities. We will achieve more that way. Evidence-based programming, I think that is what George was alluding to, and I think many of us have talked about. Let's do needs assessment. Let's tease out the issues from the community, and we can do that through the arts approach that Nicholas has mentioned. We can tease out these issues, and then we will do our interventions. So involving target community at all times. Learning from the culture. So we have to ask the question, what does the culture offer us from which we can learn and engage? So we explore deeper the culture. We look at the music. We look at the dances in our communities. We look at the visual arts in our communities. We look at the oral traditions in our communities. We look at the proverbs in our communities. Because you see, if there is one proverb that undermines gender equality, there is another one that enhances gender equality. For every proverb that is detrimental to the community, there is another one that enhances it. So let's look for those proverbs. Let's look for those sayings. Let's look at those positions and the structures that exist. So learning from the culture as much as possible. Monitoring and we integrate learning through our monitoring. Again, right from project design, so that we have a framework that helps us even be able to do the small scale attribution that we are being asked to do. So in the case of Halima, for example, the way I would do it is I would say, this is the reach of my radio. Okay, I can't go beyond such and such. But you see, as we continue improving technologically, you will have a wider reach, possibly. So reviewing, monitoring, tracking down, and so on of our interventions. Partnerships and networks. So let us form and sustain long-lasting partnerships and networks so that we are also looking at the ecosystem of the creative sector, the human rights sector, the gender sector, and the democracy sector, and looking at it totally and asking the question, who else can I have in my network to enhance my work? Who else? So you deliberately locate the who else and work with them. Very deliberately, instead of leaving it to chance. Very, very deliberate pursuits of those networks that add value to your work without getting too much into network politics, because they also bring in their own politics. But just asking the question, who else can enhance my work? Does, for example, belonging to the National Coalition for Human Rights Defenders as an organization help my work, or does it not help my work? If you're working in human rights or an arts institution. Okay. For the national government, I think that we will definitely be, because you see, this report will also be shared with the national government, because again of the work that we do with the Ministry of Culture. They need to provide an enabling environment for arts and culture to thrive, whether at the national level as well as the county level. You see, artistic freedom is protected in the Constitution. They talk about artistic freedom. They say artistic freedom, scientific freedom, academic freedom are protected. So artistic freedom is protected alongside science, alongside academic freedom. Okay? So when you do your work in arts, you are protected by the Constitution. But you also need a facilitative, environment to do that. So we are saying there's a recommendation for the national government, implement constitutional provisions related to human rights, gender equality, and democracy. Right now, people are talking about all sorts of things, but we have not even implemented Chapter 6 of the Constitution. So we need to be able to implement the provisions of the Constitution, and we need to be working there, really, for us to be able to create the type of society that we want. Finalization of national heritage and culture policy, again, that is within the domain of the national government, and reviewing the Film and Stage Plays Act. You see, you will not be able to do certain things within the current legislative framework found in the Film and Stage Plays Act. Oh, it is true. It is true. The Film and Stage Plays Act still exists. It was first passed in 1962. They have been revising, deleting certain sections here and there, but it is still there. It is still there. I think we need to get to a point where we are repealing it completely and having a more facilitative environment. I think that the sector needs to recognize that. So long as that legislation exists, it can be used against you. Ezekiel Mutua activates it for purposes of, what he calls values and morality. But it can also be activated against human rights. It can be against human rights. So we need to look at these things so that we are more aligned to it. For county governments, supporting creative hubs. I mean, the sector requires a space to do its work. So integration of creative hubs at the county. In Rongai, that the county government of Nakuru should be able to give you, an opportunity to build a creative hub, to nurture talent and so on, Same case with, our various other places, the creation of creative hubs for self-employment, the use of art and culture for social change. The evolution of approaches and strategies for social change. Again, amplification of what is working in the county. And the issues of budgets, how much do the arts, culture, and media institutions get from the county government? Very little, if at all, So I think that kind of does it for our recommendations. I hope that some of these recommendations can be taken up by ourselves as well as by other players, and that we can actually be able to move the sector forward on the basis of this. So that is what those interviews, that the 1 hour, 30 minutes, you remember that the minute when you were called and you were having that interview or the focus group discussion, that is what it has elicited. That is what it has given us. And as you said, it is still work in progress, but I hope it represents your thoughts in some way. Do I hand this back to you, Irene?
Yeah. If there are any comments or questions, but let's appreciate Prof as that is happening. So, are there any comments, questions? Because this,
Reflections.
Reflections. Because we still want to continue to enrich the report. Because as Prof mentioned, it's still being developed. But we said let's start to engage partners early, and then also work with you to identify some of those areas where you see, partner X is doing so well in this. But we have some kind of, opportunity for peer-to-peer learning in this particular area. So, any comments or questions? Reflections? Good. I think we're okay. I think we are okay.
We are good?
Yeah, we are. We are.
So I think that I think we're in a good place. I still would like to hear what, on account of what you've heard today, what are you likely to add onto your activity without changing your project? Is there something that you could add or you would like to add? If you'd like to add but do not know how to add, and so on going forward. Is there something that one could be able to do that?
Yes, Steve has something. Do we want to do it as?
Yeah, I think maybe they can write it down.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think that we would like you to do that for two reasons. The first reason is we would like to explore whether you can support each other. Because we talk about peer-to-peer learning. Is there a way that you can support each other? To enhance your own work. And if that was to be done, how could that happen? How can that happen? Because if we will match you with somebody, maybe for 2 or 3 days of learning, we'd like to know what is it that you'd like to learn. So you will have an indication of your institution, and so we are asking you a very simple question. What engagement approach would you like to learn from any of our partners in order to enhance your work? What would you like to learn? What would you like to add without necessarily touching on your budget? Because you have your budget is already allocated. But best case scenario, what else would you like to add on your project? On account of what we discussed today. So, which partner would you like to learn from if you know the name of the partner? If you don't, it is still all right. We could still be able to figure out, based on the approach you would like to adopt, which, the name of the partner, and then, we could explore how that could actually be done. So which creative tool or advocacy approach would you like to introduce in your work? You know, is there an approach that you think has potential to advance your work, and whether that approach is downstream or upstream in the sense of advocacy, or in the form of knowledge or awareness creation or capacity building and so on? What approach or tool would you like to use? So basically, once we know what you would like to add, then we will be on the path of asking the question, how can that be made possible? Sawa sawa. Evans,
Yes.
habari zako baba? Uko Kilifi ama uko Mombasa mjini?
Niko Mombasa, Kilifi, Kwale na Taveta.
Unaenda mpaka Kinango?
Yes, Kinango naenda.
Taveta unaenda wapi sasa?
Taveta naenda mpaka Utani.
Mpaka milimani huko? Barabara kabisa. Kilifi unaenda mpaka wapi?
Kilifi naenda Nairobi Sub County na Magharibi Sub County.
Magharibi Sub County. Wajua nishawahi kuingia mpaka Kayafungo.
Kayafungo. Okay.
Na wazee wakaniruhusu.
Kulikuwa viatu.
Lazima. Viatu na viatu mko. Alafu unaenda na wazee
Kabisa.
Kayafungo.
That's good.
Ni mahala muhimu sana kwa wazee wetu.
A lot to learn there.
I know. There's so much to learn. Halafu wanakufungulia mpaka pale mwanzo, kumbe hujafika, unafikiri umeenda ndani na bado hujaenda ndani sana.
Na mali hata hawezi kufikisha.
Unajua?
Hawataki uone.
Kayafungo.
So I think
we're good.
Yeah, for the partners who didn't, we can share this also, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that for the partners who are not here, we'll be able to share, and they'll be able to also fill that, and then we'll be able to process, and then we'll get back to you, on what we are seeing. And we are not making promises. I think that I have to say this. We are not making any promises. We are just trying to understand what the needs might be and what could be done without making promises of any sort. I think that's it. Unless there is any additional question, I think I'm done. So thank you so much.
So thank you, Prof. I think let's just continue to finalize that. But we really appreciate you having been with us here today. We said 9 to 1, so I think because we are approaching 1, we're really within the time that we said we could do that. So those forms, please fill them as organizations, not as individuals, so that then it's more of enhancing the organization. Yeah, so thank you very much. Let's appreciate ourselves for being here. And thank you also our audience from Kisumu, from Marsabit, different parts of Nairobi who joined us, HIVA, Rona Foundation, SACCO Accountability Forum, some of the beneficiaries of Kisumu Progressive Youth. I think there was somebody from Kisumu County. Thank you so much for those who joined us online, and for those of you who are here. I think we can close the streaming. Great. So thank you also for once again. So as we just finalized that, we can do our housekeeping. I'm not on now. We have switched off, so that they were not talking our housekeeping for the whole world. Yeah. So for those who are staying here, our checkout will be tomorrow. Other than those who are leaving today.